all about Think and Grow Rich. For those of you who aren't familiar with me or who or what I do or why I do this, um, I first read the book Think and Grow Rich when I was about 15 years old, maybe 16 years old. And I say read it. I can't say I read it. I first picked the book up and read the first few chapters and had gotten to the chapter on desire or faith or whatever it was, and had asked me to write my desires down, and I wrote three things down on a card. I wrote a particular motorcycle and two particular cars that I wanted. And that's about as far as the extent that I took the Think and Grow Rich at that point. And when I was 27 years old, maybe, 10 to 12 years later, something like that, I was driving around in my 1969 Coupe de Ville convertible, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, this was on my list, and I also realized that the other car and the motorcycle I had also gotten as well. That those goals had been met, as simple as they were, or as let's say they were have goals. I was really just remembering that I had written them on the list and they were all achieved. Made me really intrigued in the book and made me think about like the the power of writing goals and things along those lines. So I went back and read the book again. This time I read it in its entirety, and maybe read it on a regular basis for about every year and a half. I'd read it again for the next few years, and I'd always find I'd get something else out of it, but I really was reading it more for motivational for myself, or basically to center myself again. And back in 2010, I happened to be in Tucson, Arizona. I saw a guy was holding a meetup class or meetup group for Think and Grow Rich. I went ahead and joined, went out to his lesson. And as I was sitting there and listening to his lesson, I realized that this was really a 101 for people who had not been exposed to the book or hadn't read it, or whatever the case may be. And so I did not think I was going to come back. I thought to myself, well, I just didn't think I was going to come back. And just so happened it was a small class, like 4 or 5 people. And when at the end of it, one of the people turned to me and said, "Are you going to be back next week?" And I said, well, I don't know. I was really looking for a 401. This is more of a 101. And at that time, the person who was holding the class, a gentleman by the name of John Fox, said, "Would you mind staying behind and talking with me?" And I did. And he explained to me that he was looking to put together a more advanced class and was asking for my help and assistance. And so I got involved in teaching Think and Grow Rich. Since then, I've probably held this class that we're going to have 15 or 20 times, something like that. I would, every time, I personally hold this class because for a few different reasons. One of the biggest for me personally, one of the most selfish for me personally is it forces me to read the book again, forces me to sort of take another look at it. And every time I've now read the book 30 plus times, and every time I read it, I'm like get some other kind of like wow out of it. And I truly, as you can see, I'm assuming you can see up on the screen here from the introduction, where the book was not written to entertain. You cannot digest the contents properly in a week or in a month, which I think is extremely relevant when we're dealing with the book and understanding it. It's really something that should be studied, digested, and meditated upon. And I really have spent a lot of time with this book, and it is truly phenomenal. So it really, I like to create some context for people before we get started, and so everyone can understand the vernacular, the language, the time. There's figures that are used in here that can be, seem like they're not that great of amount of money. But when this book was first published in 1937, America was coming out of a depression. There were a lot of people, there was no social programs, particularly at the time. And so there were a lot of people who were hungry and focused on making money. So a lot of the book is focused purely on, or the idea of making money, because money was the priority for a lot of people then. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see where in the hierarchy of needs, there's the very first bottom level is food and shelter. And so basically you need to get food and shelter, and that's what you're concerned with and looking for. So a lot of people, when this book came out, this is what they were looking for: food, shelter, and they were looking for a way to secure it. And so a lot of the book is focused around money and that kind of thing. And so it's sort of, I've got one person that's got their microphone on. I don't know if I can get you to turn it off or get some background noise there. So anyways, the book was really centered and focused around money. but I found and helped other people with the idea that any purpose that you feel is worthy of your time, any desire you may have, it doesn't have to be just about money. It doesn't even have to be about money at all. You may find that there's goals that you have for yourself that are much more purpose-driven, and that's okay. In fact, that's actually great. And so, where you see money, you can always, put whatever it is that you're wanting there. But I always like to be able to use the money because most of us are still in a place, or we're still operating from the place where money would make things a little bit easier. On that note, when people are interviewed and asked about money and how much would make a difference in their life, typically no matter how much they make, whether they make $20,000 a year or $200,000 a year, the answer is usually around 20%. They like to make about 20. They feel like a 20%. They don't want to make a lot more money, but they want to make 20%. So look at your own limits that you might have on, what you have going and that kind of thing. So, I usually what I like to do is make these classes and make this group a discussion group more than a instructor-led group. Obviously, I've got to lead, or someone's got to lead the group and where it goes. So that's why I ask you to read the chapters before we get started so that you can bring questions or comments or things that stood out to you, and we can talk about those things. Obviously, if people don't bring stuff, I have stuff that we can speak about as well. But the class is really, the more that you get involved, the more that you share your ideas, thoughts, confusions, conflicts, whatever it might be, the more rewarding the class is for everybody. And so sometimes you're going to see things or recognize things in the book that other people didn't recognize or didn't see for whatever reason. And when you bring them up, they help them see that, or maybe they had the same question you did and just felt awkward to bring it up. But the fact of the matter is your participation will make a big difference in how enjoyable this class is and how much you get out of it. Today we're going to cover the introduction, and we're going to cover the chapter on desire. I know I said we were going to cover the chapter on faith as well on the email I sent out, but when I, and I actually had thought this before and done it once before in a class, but I forgot. But faith is such a strong chapter that it's really a chapter that needs to be discussed on its own, on its own merit. There's so much in that particular one chapter. And there's a lot in all the other chapters too, but it's hard to lump it with desire in the introduction, and it's hard to, after that is autosuggestion. So it's very hard to lump it with either one of them because the amount of information in faith and the amount of each of the, what precedes it and proceeds it is very, it's too much to handle in one class. So if you read the chapter on faith today, don't fret. I would suggest you read it again. And if you have any questions or burning comments that you want to make about it, we most certainly can cover those today. But we were not going to go into a lot of detail on faith. We're going to cover that we're going to save that for the next one. So given that, I'm assuming that most of you have read, or if you had the opportunity, you read the chapters. Is there any comments, questions, or otherwise that anyone would like to make about what they've read? All righty. And I'm assuming, how many people have actually read the chapters? How many people were able to do the homework? We got people out there that were able to do the homework?
I read the chapters.
Okay, good.
I have as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex.
And me too.
I knew you did. Cool. Did you guys have any questions or comments? Anything that stood out about you about the chapters?
I would say that it was not basically the chapters that engaged me a lot. That was probably the home task in the workbook that I remember I spent quite a lot of time thinking about, for example, people who I know who never gave up, or on the contrary, thinking about someone's example who gave up too early. So in terms of, brainstorming, that were very, well, how to say, strong tasks for me. I remember I was, trying to figure out something for that. In terms of what has been said within the first chapters, that was fine. I would say that it was more difficult for me to consume the information which goes later on in the last chapters, and I think I have like 3 or something left that are still left for me to read, but basically like the beginning was fine with me.
That's right. And that chapter in faith really is a thick chapter. That's why I've decided we would separate it out, because you're actually right. It's got a lot of stuff in it. And it's interesting that you say about, people who stuck with it and people who, gave up. I mean, of course, the very beginning of the book opens with those stories and, Edward Barnes, and the idea that, in his mind, he had already seen himself in possession of what his goal was, and that was to be a partner of at Thomas Edison's. And so, for me, that's actually was a very valuable chapter, because I cannot remember the last time I actually went to work for someone. To me, I go to work with people. So even if the legal relationship is that they are legally my employer, I'm not working for them. I'm working with them, because whatever I'm doing for them is helping me achieve the goal. My personal desires and things all center around the word freedom, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on and what that means to me, so you guys can have some context in how you create your own desires and how you create your own things. But you're absolutely right. I think spending some time thinking about the people that gave up too early and the people that stuck with it, if you take it a little further, the people that you'll see that a lot of them, the ones that like stuck with it, I think that the Edward Barnes story tells it really well. I think that, a lot of people went, oh man, what a lucky break. He got to be Edison's, partner. Well, what a great twist of fortune. But how many of us would be willing to be a janitor? Because that's basically what he came in and started as for Edison, was a janitor. How many of us would be willing to be a janitor for 5 years before we got the break that we wanted? And I think that shows that commitment, that level of commitment to his burning desire. And it's interesting to me because oftentimes, as a lot of you know, I work with salespeople, I work with small business owners, I work with a lot of people who have goals for themselves. And by the level of their desire, I can tell the level of their commitment. And so if they have a clear desire for themselves, their commitment, usually we never have to speak about their commitment. We never have to speak about the emotional difficulties they're having, because typically they are using that commitment to see them through those emotional difficulties. We may be talking about challenges or things that they have, obstacles they have in front of them to be able to achieve it, but we're not necessarily talking about that motivation. Now, I know that there's a lot of people on the line that are in their 20s, and I think that there's an unfair burden put on young people about having to figure out what to do with your life and all that kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, it probably wasn't until I was in my late 30s to early 40s that I truly understood what my purpose was and what my desire was, and was able to start to actually crystallize some solid ideas, actions, and plans around that. And so I think the first thing, if you haven't found your desire yet, if you haven't found your purpose yet, if you haven't found like what's motivating you, that's okay. That's what this really class and the work I give you and the things we do is really about. It's about creating the type of things that the ideas and the structures, the mental structures that will help you find that. And so this is an exercise, we're going to talk a lot about. When this book was written in 1937, they didn't have MRI brain imaging. They didn't have a lot of the medical technology that we have now that we can see sort of how things work. And so in a lot of parts of the book, he'll attribute to some unknown force or some unseen force. And now at this point, we know what some of those unseen and unknown forces are. And one of them is the idea of, I want to say the mental, when you start to think a particular way, it takes a while for your brain to get trained to think that. And you have to create these mental pathways for your thoughts to be creating that way. And so when he talks about desire here, and he sort of talks about this obsession with desire. And mind you, we've in our, at least here in the America, we've been exposed to the Buddhist idea and the Christian fundamental idea that to want is bad, and desire is the root of all suffering, and it's the person who lives a meek life and a humble life is the one who has a rewarding life. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that now I understand that the Buddhists of course are talking about human life being suffering, but the fact of the matter is desire is a normal part of our life. And when we're talking about desire, or when he uses the word obsession in the book, he's not talking from like some weirdo stalking point of obsession. He's talking about when you can't get it off your mind. And so when you start to find that what that is for yourself, and that's what you're thinking about, and that's where like every the flow of your mind, like a river, starts to follow that path, that's when this stuff starts to really start to sink in. So if you're struggling with finding what your desire is, or what your purpose is, or what it is that you're really wanting, that struggle is creating these neural pathways for yourself to be able to start to discover that. So, in other words, don't be discouraged if you're reading this and you sort of feel lost and you sort of feel like, well, I don't have this burning desire for anything yet. Or sometimes it could be that you feel like what you desire might be like not socially acceptable in your circle. So I know a lot of young women who they desire to be a mother. And they actually, it's one of their, it's one of the most noblest, it is the most noble profession in the world, to be a mother. And it's one of the most serious and one of the greatest responsibilities. Yet they're afraid that if they say, hey, my goal is to be a mom, that they'll get ridiculed by their peers as not reaching out to be the most that they can be. And, coming from and we'll probably get it into some other meeting, but coming from a situation where I didn't have a great mother, I didn't have a nurturing mother, I didn't have someone along those lines, I personally know the effects of someone not being a great mother. And actually, fortunately for me, I had a great stepmother who filled that gap for me and taught me a lot about what that position motherhood is and the greatness that it is. So sometimes we're just ashamed, or we feel some type of shame in doing what we want because it doesn't feel this altruistic, or doesn't have this great purpose or this great desire. Not everyone is born to save the world. Not everyone can be a martyr. Not everyone is going to, if your desires are about you and providing for you and your family, then that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I had a client once who felt awkward because his goal happened to be centered around making money. And, rather than, and he'd always try to sort of like hide it or justify it behind, well, when I have money, I'd be able to do this, be able to do that. And I finally was like, just own it. Own the fact that you want money. It's okay. There's some people that is truly what their goal and their desire is. As soon as he could own it, it started to change for him and become a different thing. So again, as we're going through this, and if you know me long enough and you end up going through, I've had a few people go through this class with me 3 or 4 times, and it's because again, the book was not written to entertain. It's, meant to be studied, digested, and meditated upon. So we're going to cover a lot of that as time goes on, and how it all, basically fits together and all those great pieces. The other story in here, in as far as the I want to say commitment desire, is the one where that I really like a lot. It's actually, there's 2 stories by the one person, but it's the 3 feet from gold. How many of us in our own lives have quit, and if we had just stuck with it a little longer, whatever it is we were looking to break, it would have happened. I'll give you an example in my own life. Many years ago, in 1997 or so, I've been around computers and IT since I was, since 1981, since I was 12 years old. And so in 97, the internet was taking off. There was sort of this demand going on, and so I decided, okay, this is a route I'm going to take. And so I would jump in. I created a company. I would go out. I would do all this, marketing and talking to people. And 2 or 3 weeks would go by, and the phone wouldn't ring, and I'd panic. I'd start to get worried. Rent's due, money's coming. I got to pay the bills, and whatever. So I'd go take a job, And as soon as I took the job, it'd be like my second day on the job, my phone would start to ring and people would say, hey, can you come out, da-da-da. And unfortunately, I couldn't because I had taken this job. And so all my efforts in creating that would go to waste. And so it actually took me 3 times to recognize this. On the 3rd time that I went through this scenario, when I get to that point of like where I felt like the rubber band was going to break, it was being stretched. My life was being so stretched. And again, it was 2, 3, 4 weeks into it. I decided that this time I wouldn't go get a job. I wouldn't quit when I was 3 feet away from gold. I was going to stick with it. And sure enough, I built a company for the next like 12 years off of that effort and being able and just really that persistence of knowing that this is what I didn't want to go work for anyone else. I wanted to work for myself, and knowing that's what I wanted and understanding and seeing the pattern of quitting 3 feet away, of responding to the panic or the worry that was going on in my mind. Now at this point, I didn't have mental discipline, and that's a lot of what this book is about. It's Think and Grow Rich. And when I first read it when I was 17 years old, I first read the title and I looked at it and went, I just saw the rich part. I didn't really understand the think part. I didn't understand how much thought plays in our lives and how strong thought really is. Earl Nightingale once said that you become what you think about, and it is extremely true. You become what you think about. So that's why creating these neural pathways and becoming in the habit of thinking particular ways becomes very important. And this book and studying this book and going over it several times will help you start to develop that for yourself. So I also like the story that from the same guy that was about the little black girl who refused to take no for an answer. And mind you, I don't know what her mother needed that money for, but it was very serious because she definitely was going to stay there. So she was willing to take the beating before she gave up. And how many of us could face that same situation with someone who was, angry with us, already had a predisposed position against us, and yet still stood up in the face of that? And so when you really think about what that little girl had to face at the time, how many of us would be willing to face death? Because that's basically what she was looking in the eye. But whatever it was, than her worrying about the death. And she stuck in there and was able to get it with that determination. And I don't know how many of us have that same determination. If you've owned your own business ever, or you've ever been a parent can feel that. There's a lot of places where we can feel that determination. But feeling that determination in the face of, almost certain death is really a very admirable trait. So, when we're really talking about desire and we're talking about what desire is, it's not some kind of like, I get where the idea of, desire, unfulfilled desire can cause suffering. I absolutely get that. And oftentimes with that kind of unfulfilled desire or that type of suffering, what's happened is the person's really not truly desiring. They're wishing or they're dreaming, but they're not desiring. Because a desire, when we desire something, again, it goes back to that commitment. We have that commitment to carry through and see what we're putting to the end, or to the next phase, or whatever it might be. Desire drives us to make our wishes and dreams become manifest. So something might start as a wish, and then as you start to dream about it and you start to think about it, it might just start to become more of an obsession for you. And then when you start to plan and start to make it happen and put it into action, that's when things start to really, really change and take form. There's nothing in this world that didn't start as an idea. When you look at the computer you're sitting in front of, the phone that you're on, the microphone that you're using, the keyboard, the desk, the building you're in, all of it started as an idea. And at some point, that idea went from someone's mind. There might have been 2 or 3 people's mind. Then it went down onto paper. And once it got out onto paper, it started to take a life of its own and move from there. So everything starts with the idea. There's nothing in the world that doesn't start with an idea. And so it's what we do with that idea. I've known a lot of people in my lifetime that have had a lot of great ideas. They're still working at their mid-paid job and don't have any progress on that idea because it wasn't really a desire. It was something that they were like, oh, wouldn't this be cool, or wouldn't this be convenient? And they'll talk about how they have all these great ideas all the time if they only had the money to make it happen. And, I found that usually it's not the money that's the problem. It's, don't get me wrong, money, you have to create a vessel for yourself for money to come into that. But that's really where the key is. What is the plan behind your desire? So, is anybody in particular willing to talk about or willing to share how they either are struggling for finding their desire and what they feel are their issues that are standing between it, or share their desire? Go ahead and own it out, tell everybody in the group, here's what I desire, and sort of make a declaration. Anybody willing to stand up and do anything along those lines? That's not everyone talk at once. I'll tell you what my desire is. I'll tell you guys how this all came about for me. And this came about maybe on the 29th reading of the book, something along those lines. I've been creating this workbook for a couple years, putting pieces together and things along those lines. And I've decided I'm going to put this workbook, sort of bring all the pieces together so I can go ahead and start to use it as a tool to help other people. And so I'm actually going through the lessons that I have in the workbook. The reason those lessons are in the workbook or the exercises is because they work. That I've used them, I've seen them work, and they're effective. And so I'm going through them, and I discover one word that wraps up almost my purpose completely. And that word is freedom. When I was a young boy, I think I've told some of you, when I say young boy, I mean like 2 years old. I left the house. We had a convenience store, woods behind our house, and then a convenience store on the other side of that. And I left the house. I went to the convenience store, talked this lady into buying me some sugar babies, came home, and got spanked because I had left the house as a 2-year-old. I used to knock on my neighbors' doors asking for cookies. As I got older, when I was allowed to leave the neighborhood on my bicycle around the age of 12 or somewhere, I was gone. I rode all over the city. As I got a little older and started to become rebellious, my rebellion was an immature form of freedom. I used to say, screw it, do what you want. And I was always encouraging people to follow what they wanted. So as I've matured and I've understood what freedom is and what the responsibilities that come with freedom, I've realized that freedom is the word, is the purpose, is what I do. So with each one and every one of you who's worked with me at any kind of level, you know that what I've really spoken to you about, or what I've really given you, is the freedom to do things that you didn't know you could do, freedom to break through barriers you didn't know you could break through, whatever the case may be. But everything I do is about freedom and encouraging other people to be able to be free for themselves as well. And so, but this took me, again, a long time to sort of discover and figure, and I had to do this introspection and start to understand who I was. I had to take a look at, when I was rebellious and I did a lot of stuff as a young man, I was told by a lot of people that there was something wrong with me, that, I shouldn't behave this way. I should get in line and be part of what everybody else is doing. And so I was, I dropped out of high school, and people were like, why are you doing this? You're too intelligent. You need to go to college. But I disagreed with them, and I wanted my freedom at the time. And did I trade the greater freedoms of tomorrow for the lesser freedoms of today, or the today back then? Yes, that was a mistake I may have made in my search for freedom, but I was unwilling to give up freedom for following the crowd, or being another one in the crowd. And so that whole word permeates my life from the time thought entered my mind, from the time that I was able to think and recognize that me as a separate human being, it was in the attempts towards freedom. And so there's things that you guys have too. There's things that your mind defaults back to that you, for whatever reason, have either buried, you don't necessarily feel like you should, whatever the case may be. And so it's going to be our job, and what we want to do in this class, to uncover that albatross, to find out what it is. It's already there. It's not like you guys have to go out and discover somewhere outside yourself what you're looking for. It's already inside you what you're looking for. And so, there may be some cases where it's not. So I mean, I can't speak for every case, but I've just found most times, all the times I've counseled and worked with someone, they know what they want, but they might be afraid to go get it. and oftentimes are afraid to go get it because they may have failed at a different time. They don't want to go through the humiliation of that failure again. There's some other kind of level of ridicule or some negative feeling that they have that keeps them from standing back up and trying to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. So that's where the inventory section that I included in the email becomes extremely important. And if you haven't done it yet, I suggest this weekend or next weekend or one of the weekends before our next class, you go through that inventory. Take a Saturday, tell everyone I'm not available for a couple hours, and you go through that inventory. If you are married or you have someone close to you, have them go through the inventory for you. Say, hey, evaluate me on these things for looking in from the outside. So, because even though that inventory it's a little brutal, to be honest with you, it's a little like, if you're honest with it, you realize, that you're not necessarily, it exposes your weaknesses and exposes the places that are actually obstacles and keeping you from achieving what you want. But if you can take that inventory now and then take another one at the beginning of the year, and at minimum take one a year, you'll be interested to see what that change is over time, and you'll start to realize that the effect of thinking has on your world. So, what would you think? How would you think if you knew people could see your thoughts? If you knew that someone could see your thoughts as you thought them, would you think the same way that you're thinking? So, because to the trained person, they can read your thoughts. They can see your thoughts. Because to the trained person, what happens is they recognize certain things like, I'll give you an example. There's a young man that I work with who he's in his mid-20s, really talented guy, but he's suffering from some issues of inadequacy. And so he'll tell me some lies about to sort of promote himself and look good. And when he tells me those lies, not only do I know that they're a lie, but I know why he's lying when he does it. I can see because I was that young man at one point. And by being able to walk through that and be honest with myself and witness that, now when I come across it, I can see it much easier. A lot of you who have worked with me will say, I'll give you some suggestions on how to handle a prospect or how to handle a situation with another human being. And you'll ask me, well, how do you know this? And when I answer you, oftentimes it's hard to answer because it's going through the painful process of self-inventory that made it possible for me to know that, or some other painful process. And somewhere here in the book, in the chapter, he talks about with every failure is the seed of achievement, or is the seed of what it is that you're looking to for. That is really the essence of what most of the things that came out in my life is the fact that the misfortunes that happened, I was able to use them in a way that made it possible for me to be able to get that seed, that whatever that nurturing piece out of it would be. And so that's why, when you look at your failures, there's this really great thing that happens. If you're afraid to look at your failures, you won't get anywhere. And each and every one of us has failures. So my failures, I could, they're huge. I could list failures, and I do my successes because they were my failures, and they had this different quality to them, and they made me, I rather than put my head in the sand and say, no, I don't have these problems, I actually wanted to understand why I was having these problems, and I embraced my failures, and I started to become very good at making that kind of effort and work towards when things would trip up. And so now at 47 years of age, I have this arsenal of methods and things I understand about people. So when you guys ask me what should I do in this situation, it's because I've understood my failures and was willing to take a look at them. So that inventory section I sent you is very, very valuable. It'll expose some things to you that you may or may not know this first time you do it. But when you do it, 3, 4, 5 times, it'll start to expose some significant things to you, not just what you succeeded at, but what you failed at as well. So really, really an amazing, that inventory really is a great part of all this. just as I'm scrolling here, I was scrolling the chapter of desire, but the on my website, which is pinckinc.com, pinkinc.com, under the TGR, I think I have like TGR Legends or something like that, a tab. You can actually go out to the website and take a look at who these different people were. I found it to be sort of a little, let's see here, we'll bring this up. I found it to be, I didn't know who a lot of these people were. And so I went out and I sort of, the people I could find things on, I went out and did this, or each one of them is here. So if I wanted, George Eastman, we know he was, of course, Eastman Kodak. But if you click on the picture, it'll actually take you to the Wikipedia page that describes who they were, what they accomplished, all that kind of stuff. So if you're ever reading the book and you're curious about one of the people, you can come out to the site and see that a lot of these people are out here on, and you want to see what they did, you can go ahead and boom, and figure out, basically give you some context. That's one of the difficult things about the book is that, the money it uses and the people it uses and that kind of thing are all people that were, 2 or 3 generations ago, they were successful, but they may have been forgotten, or they may not be talked about, or we may not even be part of the culture that they were part of culture of. So you can go out here and discover who it is you might want to discover for yourself in that regard. So far, any questions, comments, or otherwise? So again, here in this highlight, this is awesome. All achievement, all earned riches have their beginning in an idea. I said this earlier. And it's the desire behind that idea that drives it. Some of you work with people who call up and they have an idea for a piece of software, they have an idea for a piece of, whatever it might be. And there's some of them are like really great ideas. Other of them are just rehashes of old ideas that have already been done, or that, they've already been proven out, whatever the case may be. But there's people you've run across who really, their desire is so strong to accomplish their idea that even if they don't have the money, they figure out where to go get it. That person is rare. If you've dealt with enough of them, you found that that's like a 1 out of 100 person. Typically what happens, you have a lot of people who have an idea and they have the beginning of earned riches and achievement, but they don't necessarily follow it through with the desire. So, again, the desire is one of these things that it really needs to be cultivated. It needs to be, there's someone in your life that has a strong burning desire to accomplish something. And that person, he may even see obsessed, or he or she may not be able to, you want to go out with them, they go, no, I have to work, or whatever the case may be. They're so consumed with that desire that you can almost guarantee that consumption with a desire is going to pay off for them, that's going to carry them through whatever failure they have. So that's sort of what we have to ask ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, what is the level of desire that I have here? Is it like Barnes here, who said he wanted to work with Edison, not for him? Like I told you, when I go to work, in any situation, I'm working with that person, not for them. Because that person, whatever it is that job happens to be delivering me, typically money, that money is enabling me to be able to do what we're doing today, and to be able to take the time to be able to write the material that I write and create the things I write that I want, that are truly my desire and where I'm rolling with that desire. So, I mean, if you really think about what's really cool about we've got a microphone on out there, if we can knock it, but so what's really cool about this story with Barnes is, he didn't even know Edison, nor did he even have the money to get to Edison. He had to hop a train, had to basically be a hobo and hop a train to get out there. And so, and remember I told you earlier that, people who understand can read what people are thinking. And here it's talking about how Edison says, he stood there before me looking like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in the expression of his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he had come after. So this is really, I can't emphasize this enough, that you become what you think about. There's this saying, for those of you that might be worried about your looks, there's a saying that says, before you're 40, genetics is responsible for the way you look. After you're 40, your attitude and who you are is responsible for the way that you look. And so I truly believe that. I've seen a lot of people, and I've watched, I have friends that I've known for well over 35 years, and I've gotten to see them from small children to grow up, and the ones who are now over 40 and still have that youthful bounce and that youthful expression and all that, versus the ones that seem to be almost like a dry apple, just withering up and becoming beyond their years and age, at least in appearance, is oftentimes relates what I see, because I know the backstory of their life. I see that their life really plays a big role of that. Now, mind you, some of the people that are looking, young and bountiful, they've had some very hard and trying times, but it was the way in which they approached those hard and trying times that made the difference, not the hard and trying time. We're all going to have hard and trying times. It's the way that we approach them and the kind of determination we have to get through them. So I really love this whole story with Barnes. I think that he was actually one of the harder people to find things about, but this is really amazing. I mean, he just, for 5 years, how many of us would be willing to give up 5 years without the promise of getting what you want, of no guarantee of making it to being able to work with Edison? But he did, and he made it happen. So when the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form and from a different direction than Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in by the back door, and often it comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many people fail to recognize opportunity. And so, again, embracing the idea that, I have to let this is where we're going to get into like a little bit of we're going to get more into detail in later in subsequent chapters, but this is where we sort of have to have this faith of allowing the world to do what it needs to do. So when I refer to the universe, I'm referring to this benevolent force that, if we're open to it, yes, it may be coincidence, but it may be more than coincidence. Then we see it happen in our lives. And what will happen is, if I have, this is what I'm looking for, this is where I'm wanting to find. This is where my goal is. Oftentimes, the path to being able to reach that goal is not what I expected it to be. And so if in other words, I'm more concerned at this point in my life with the content of the package rather than how the package was delivered or what the package looks like. So I'm not going to define how it's going to be delivered to me. I'm going to define what it is I'm going to receive. For one big reason, it may be much easier to get what I want than the way I'm defining it to myself and the way I have to achieve. I'll give you an example. A lot of us have been instructed hard work is what will get us to where we want to be. Now, I want you to think about that, hard work versus, let's say, maybe determination or desire. So if you're ever driving down the road and you see a construction crew working on the road itself, they've got the hot tar, they've got the shovels, they've got the heavy equipment, they're sweating. That is hard work. And those people, let's say, get paid $15 an hour, maybe some of them $20, $25 an hour. There's a manager that they have who doesn't work quite as hard, but he's out in the field with them. He's telling them what to do, and he's taking orders from someone in an office. Now, he makes a little more than the people that are out in the field, and he doesn't have to work as hard. And then the guy that's sitting in the air-conditioned office telling that guy what to do, he even makes more money, and he's not working anywhere near as hard. And if we continue to go up the chain, we see at the top of the chain is someone that is, again, determined, has desire, wants to make it happen. But as far as hard work goes, they get to take every Wednesday afternoon off and play golf. They get to be able to have a vacation time with their family. They're able to not have to worry about money because they're making enough of it because of the position that they're in. So hard work that's a great illusion. And so if you just telling yourself, hey, I have to go through some hard, laborious work to get what I want, you may very well be missing the opportunity to get what you want through a much easier path. So determine what you want, and the path to you achieving it will expose itself to you. And oftentimes, for me at least, it's only exposed itself in hindsight. So I'll give you an example in my own personal world, something I have been very identified with. And when I sold my business in Florida and I went to Tucson, it was to take care of my dying parents. And at least that's what I felt like it was. The 2008 crash had happened. It had affected me. Right before the 2008 crash, I was thinking about I would be able to retire in a year or two and be able to, really not ever have to work again. And little did I know that the 2008 crash was coming. So it came, and of course, if someone had told me, hey, man, you're going to go through this, you're going to lose lots of money, you're going to go back to the home in which a lot of pain happened for you as a child. In fact, you're going to relive a lot of that pain. You're going to go back through and have to feel a lot of that fear you felt as a child. And the next 4 or 5 years are going to be very, very humiliating and very failure-ridden, and it's going to be miserable. If someone had told me that, and that's what I was going to go through, I never would have gone to Tucson. I would have stayed in Florida and said, no, I don't want to have to go through all that. But see, I want freedom. And when I went through all that, what managed for me was what came out with on the other side was this sense of freedom that I had not experienced before. Not only was I free to understand maybe money better, but I was free from this childhood perception of the world that had been dogging me for a long time, because at the time of a child, I didn't go through the emotional content of the horrible things that had happened to me as a child. And so that emotional content was waiting to be honored, was waiting to be felt. And so when I went back and went through all the, to those of you I've shared the story with, it was a horrible time. But looking back on hindsight, if someone was to say, hey, would you now, knowing what you know, would you have stayed in Florida? I'd go, no way. I would embrace and go through what I went through for what I received back, again, towards my personal goal of freedom, because I'm now freer in my thoughts and in my process to be able to do things without the taint of my childhood. So, I'll give you, there's a statement out there that says, hurt people hurt people. And I came from a very, very destructive childhood. And so when I came out into this world as an adult, I thought it was my job to hurt people, to get them, give you an example. Actually, when I was still a little boy, 10, 11 years old, and had left that situation and had gone to the situation where my stepmother, the person who really taught me what nurturing was, she had 2 daughters, my stepsisters. And I felt like, seeing that they had this sort of soft mother who nurtured them all the time, I felt like they needed to have someone that hurt them, who prepared them for the world, because the world was a tough, really place that we are going to get hurt by. And so I would grab them really strong and shake them and say, I'm doing this because I love you, right? Or at least that's how I would think about it. And so that whole concept of understanding that the world isn't really a hard place, that I was just born into a hard situation, was something that I was able to give up and become a more nurturing person as a result of going to Tucson. One of many things. And that becoming a more nurturing person moves me closer to the freedom and what I'm attempting to do. So again, we don't always know how what we're looking for is going to come to us. We can't necessarily, like he says here, it has a sly habit of slipping in the back door, and often it comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. And I promise you, as I went through Tucson, the 5 years I was out there, it was a lot of defeat. And I would not trade it for the world now, looking back on hindsight. So don't determine how it's going to come for you. Let it come the path it needs to come. Just be clear on what it is that you're wanting. And again, if you're not there yet, don't worry about it. That's what this class is about, and it's why we do what we do. So, of course, I highlight certain parts in this highlighted book that I thought were important, but I always, as I'm reading it, I go, oh, why didn't I highlight this, or why didn't I highlight that? But, he knew what he wanted, and the determination to stand by that desire until he realized it. We've talked about the 3 feet from gold. How defeating does this have to be able to learn that the guy you sold the stuff to and discussed and walked away from it all, he, just 3 feet. He wasn't called an expert. How many times do we not call the expert? We think, oh, we can do it ourselves, and what do we pay for it? For those of you who are selling software, how many times do people call up and think, well, let me go ahead and I'm not going to use this expert, I'm going to use the buddy next door, and it ends up costing them much more money than just doing it right the first way. So, or calling an expert, getting the people involved that need to be called. So, long story short, this is a really great one. One of the neat things about this was, the uncle, of course, was the guy that got the gold fever. It was most of the money which went into the machinery was procured through the efforts of Darby, who was then a very young man. The money came from his relatives and neighbors because of their faith in him. Now, he paid back every dollar, but imagine how painful that was to pay back all that money knowing that you quit 3 feet from gold. And so, the fact of the matter is this guy, he, we don't know. I always wonder what role his uncle played in talking him into quit, because obviously he was a man of character. So before success comes in any man's life, he's sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit, and that's exactly what the majority of men do. More than 500 of the most successful men this country has ever known told the author the greatest success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. It takes great delight in tripping one when success is almost within reach. And I don't know if any of you have experiences in your own lives or anything that you'd like to share. It'd be great. You can speak up if you like. But I can't tell you how many times. The story I told you about starting business, it was just one step beyond. All I had to do was not quit, just stick with it. And as soon as I stuck with it, it became, that 12 years of my career was some of the most prosperous I'd ever had in my life. I created millions of dollars during that period of time, and it was just because I didn't quit. I did quit the first 2 times, and I learned my lesson not to quit. So, but again, you have to be open to that. And I think, again, the story with the little girl is very, it just shows the desire and determination. I still don't know. I would really like to know what her mother needed that money for, what it was. Was it medicine for her brother? Was it medicine for the mom? Was it, food? What was it that allowed her to face death? And so, I saw a motivational speaker that said it great one time. When you desire what you desire, like your breath, then you'll achieve it. So if you imagine if you and I are in a pool and I dunk you and hold you down underwater, I'm assuming you're going to fight me so that you can get up and get air. You're going to fight for air. It's not going to be some kind of like, oh, well, he's really got a strong hold of me. There's nothing I can do, and you're going to quit. You're going to claw, you're going to bite, you're going to scratch, you're going to do everything it takes to be able to grab that breath of air. And so for me, freedom is the identification of freedom, and what that means to me is like air. I want it more than I want air. And so that is determination, that's desire. And that's what this little girl had. She was willing to face death so that she could achieve what she needed for whatever reason she felt it was so important. I would always still love to know, and I've imagined all kinds of things that it could be for, but I would love to know what it was that really, was created the motivation in her to be able to stop. But I don't know if I'll ever know or not, but it was pretty good. So, let's roll on in here to, I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Again, a lot of this is, you guys have copies of the book. If you don't, you can go out to the website and download them, yada, yada. But really, ultimately, this whole introduction and desire comes as a inspiration to realize what it really takes to be able to put yourself on a path towards what you want. It really starts with desire. And, it talks about the determination of Ford here, who he wanted the, cast iron 8-cylinder gas engine in one piece. And he had all kinds of experts telling him, no, it can't be done. How many, think about all the times in the world, all the things that we're enjoying in our world that somebody had said, you're crazy, that can't be done. I'm sure you guys read the story about Marconi when he went and, because as soon as he started saying that he could transmit talking across the without any wires, they had them, put in a mental hospital because they're like, you're crazy. And so how many times has someone been told crazy? And if they just listened to everybody else, where we wouldn't be. And thank goodness they didn't listen to everybody else. Thank goodness they understood that most people don't get it. Most people are going to quit before they achieve what they want. And so Ford most certainly was one of those people. And that's, again, what basically these two chapters talk about is the determination and how important the desire is for us to be able to drive our efforts and our energies through until it. Now, again, it says money conscious until the desire for money drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. For me, it's freedom conscious until the desire for freedom drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. So, again, it doesn't have to be money. And if you see money in here and you're like, well, personally, me, I'm not really money motivated. I'll give you a sort of another sort of piece of advice along these lines that I had to discover for myself. When you're writing out your goals and you're writing out the things you want, do I really want this? And so I'll give you an example of when I had, gotten to Tucson, I started working on this book again. I started thinking to myself, I want a $7 million house that looks out over Tucson from one of the, Tucson's in a valley, so I wanted to be in the foothills down looking out over Tucson. I thought, this is really, this is what I want. And it wasn't what I wanted, but I didn't really know that at the time. And fortunately, by twist of fate, one of my clients was good friends with the guy that owned the Cadillac dealership in town. And he said, hey, listen, man, he's got a really nice house up in the foothills. In fact, it's the highest point in the foothills or of any home that looks out over Tucson. I have to go there. Do you want to come with me? I'm like, oh, I'd love to come with you. So I'm walking through the house with this guy that owns it, and we're talking. And at one point, I turn to him and I go, how much did you pay for the house? Now, if you're in my sales classes, I make a habit out of that of talking about money so that I can be comfortable about talking about money when I'm in the sales process. So typically, if I'm ever in a house, I see someone buy a car, I see someone whatever, I always go, how much did you pay for it? And so I did that. I said, how much did you pay for it? He goes, oh, it was about $7 million. I'm like, wow. What I realized at that point was I don't want a $7 million house. As beautiful as the house was, as beautiful as his view was, and it truly was a beautiful house and a beautiful view, I saw the maintenance, because I asked him about how much maintenance it required. Basically to run that $7 million house costs like $140,000, $150,000 a year. And so I saw all the maintenance, all the people, all the responsibilities, and you know what I saw? I saw lack of freedom. Now, I hadn't identified my word freedom yet, but I saw lack of freedom in that house. And I went, ooh, I don't want a $7 million house. So that's what a lot of this process is discovering what we don't want. Because sometimes we think we want these things because we were told we were supposed to want these things. Sometimes what we perceive of the measurements of success aren't the measurements we created for ourselves, but rather they're the measurements that we created for, or someone else created for us, or society created for us. We went and we saw how much respect the guy that's got the $7 million house has, and we want that respect. So we go, well, $7 million must be what buys that respect. Who knows? But my point being is it's that understanding what you desire and what you want becomes extremely important through this whole process, because that's really when you can identify what drives you, and a lot of times it's through a process of elimination, then you'll be able to start to really accelerate and gain traction through this whole program. Desire is again, it's not easily come by. For some people, yeah, maybe it is. I wasn't easily come by for me. I had to learn I had to be able to identify exactly what it is I wanted to really be able to understand the power of desire. I wake up every morning, like this morning, I woke up at about 4:30. I had a hard time sleeping last night, so I didn't go to bed till about 2. Sev and I were talking in the beginning of the call before we started, and I told him I had 2.5 hours worth of sleep. And what makes it possible is I love what I do. And so for me to wake up at 4:30 in the morning is not a problem. Even when I went to bed at 2, I still was able to get up at 4:30. I'm 47, so I wouldn't say I bounced out of bed, but I bounce as well as I can at 47, and was ready. And actually, I prepared more for this class, even though I've spent this past week going over material and thinking about what we would speak about or whatever the case may be. I did it even more this morning because this class excites me. This is something that I know that, you know, right now it looks like there's 8 people online, so there's 7 of you there out there. You know, I'll get a class of, oftentimes it'll start, when we do them in person, there'll be 25, 30 people that will come to the first class. And by the last class, it'll be down to 1 or 2 people because, you know, I just know people haven't identified what they're really wanting, and they were hoping that they could come and take a pill or come and just read one line and it would make all the difference. But those 1 or 2 people that made it to the end, they're definitely what's worth it for me because they're getting the message and they're working towards their freedom. So this class excites me because I know that even if only 1 of you makes it to the end, then that's fine because that's the thing that's what I'm working for, is helping and turning people on to what they want, which essentially will give them the freedom that they're looking for. So in other words, because I have this desire, because I have this strong feelings towards what we're doing and what I'm trying to accomplish, it's easy for me to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and do what I need to do. Do some mornings I go, oh, really? The alarm already? Of course I do. It's just how it is. I still get out of bed. I still go, you know, as soon as I get the coffee in and start rolling, it's just another day. It's, you know, life goes on because, again, it's what I am desiring. So, you know, I think this is sort of interesting. You know, this burned all the bridges behind him idea, you know, definitely Barnes did it because, you know, he took what little or no money he had, went to Orange, New Jersey and said, okay, this is, you know, it's do or die. And he made it happen. This story here where they talk about the general or the warrior who burned all the boats, one day I went out to go like validate this story, and because I wanted to know, you know, who was it, what were the circumstances, all that. Well, there's like 6 or 7 different times in history that this has been done. It wasn't just once. It's been done several times where basically it's a do or die situation. And exactly this whole, you know, they went by ship, they burned the ships, they were only going to get off the island if they won, has happened several times in history. And in each one of those times they won. Now, mind you, if they lost, we may not be hearing. They may not have been around to write their record their history. So maybe for the 7 that won, there were 7,000 that lost. But I don't believe so, because when you're doing it like your life depends on it, there's an essence that comes out of the human spirit, the human character, whatever you want to call it, that is like no other. And it's why we sit in the world that we sit in. It's because of that essence and that spirit that's happening. Every person who wins in any undertaking must be willing to burn his ships and cut all sources of retreat. And, you know, that's the whole idea. Sometimes it's hard because we sort of want that safety net. We want to make sure that if it's not us who wants the safety net, it's our loved ones. They're going to be, you know, I call my immediate family and my immediate loved ones, I call them my beloved thugs, because I love them to death, but oftentimes they're the ones that are going to talk me out of my desires first. They're going to be the ones that tell me, are you sure you want to do that? Because, see, they're afraid that they love me and they want they want my well-being. So anytime I share risk with them or the risks that I'm involved with, they're very worried because they see the downside of the risk and they have a hard time seeing the upside. Now, there's other people, let's say a circle or 2 out, that I don't share my goals with them oftentimes either because they want to tell me how I can't achieve them, how that's impossible, like the Marconi people. They want to lock me up, whatever the case may be. So I don't tell my goals to them either. I have a rule about goals and actually about problems. I only share my goals or problems with the people that can help me with them. So I know sometimes I'll share my goal as I'm helping somebody. I'll read them my desire statement so they can get an idea of what a desire statement is. But as far as, like, you know, what do you think about my goals, getting feedback about my goals, all that, I only share that information or those discussions with the people that can help me achieve them. And the same with my problems. If I have problems, I don't talk about them with everybody. I only talk about them with the people that can help me fix them. Because, again, you know, goals, a lot of people are going to be telling you that you can't do it. And I don't want to hear that. I don't want to have any part of it. There's also another little brain thing that if you know how to, if you're aware of it, it becomes much easier to manage. But as you start to talk about your goals, your brain starts to feel like you've achieved them. And so then it becomes harder sometimes to achieve them because your brain sort of quits and says, we've done it all. And there's a way to be able to use that to your advantage too, but we'll talk about that in later chapters. So every human being who reaches the age of understanding of the purpose of money wishes for it. Wishing will not bring riches, but desiring riches with a state of mind that becomes an obsession, then planning definite ways and means to acquire riches, and backing those plans with persistence which does not recognize failure will bring riches. That's the formula. And again, it starts with desire. And so that really, that obsession, that you can't get it off your mind. For those of you who are in a relationship with someone, and particularly if you've been in it for a year or more, you know, the way that you think about your mate today is not the way you thought about them when you first met them. And if it is, God bless you. I'm envious. When you first met them and you were intrigued by them, they were on your mind almost all the time. You were doing things and preparing things and thinking about them. They were on your mind. And then as you started to date them and get to know them better, and there was this fun exchange where you guys, and then it was all great and it's fun and all that. Now, a year, 2 years down the road, all this other albatross of life has piled on, other responsibilities, or maybe you've been with them for 10 years, but now it's not that you're not considerate of them. It's not that you don't think about them. It's not that, you know, you don't desire them, but they're not on your mind all the time, whereas they were when you first met them. And that's what is meant by sort of this obsession. What is on your mind all the time? What is it that you keep coming back to? And a lot of you actually have desires that you can identify when you start to look and listen to what you're thinking about most of the time. So we're going to talk about this especially in a later chapter, the chapter on autosuggestion. But you have a voice in your head, and that voice is constantly talking to you one way or the other. It's constantly interpreting the world around you. It's constantly fanning someone and what you should have said or what you should have done, or conversations that you're going to have in the future with this person, and you're going to say this and they're going to say that, and then you're going to say this in response, and then they'll say that, and yada yada, and none of that ever comes to true. It's all this mental masturbation that we do, but we always have this conscious thought running in our mind of something, this voice. And as we start to listen to that voice, when we start to actually not direct it or feel like we're directing it, but we just listen to where it goes and what it keeps talking about or what it keeps coming back to, we can start to really understand who we are and what our motives are. If we don't listen to the voice, it becomes much more difficult, because the voice inside your head reveals more about you to you than you know. And so if you imagine this voice in your head, if you were listening to someone else say this out loud to you, what would you think of that person? What would you be thinking what were they obsessed with? What were they wanting to do? What were they trying to achieve? Were they disciplined to be able to have the same thought process for more than 3 or 4 seconds, to be able to go, you know, if a lot of people's minds, and you might be guilty of this or not, but a lot of your minds go think about something for 2 or 3 seconds, and then it's the stream of consciousness goes and thinks about, you know, something was said there that makes you think about this, and then makes you think about that, and makes you think about this, and 20 seconds later you're thinking about something completely different than what you were and initially had started to set out to think about. And so again, a lot of what we're going to show and teach in this course, and the book is going to show you, and the workbook is going to show you, is how to start to understand, observe ourselves, understand ourselves, and start to actually influence that stream of consciousness. Start to actually put that stream of consciousness to work for us. Because that stream of consciousness that you have going on in your mind is what's creating your world for you. And so we're going to get more specific on how that works and why that is the case that it is in subsequent chapters. Chapter 3 on autosuggestion is absolutely one of the best chapters there is in the book. And it's After Faith, which is another excellent chapter in the book. So there's a lot, I mean, I think almost every chapter in the book is excellent. But long story short, this voice we have in our heads that we're listening to, that's contributing to who we are and what makes up what we do, has a big influence in the way that we operate and what we go to. So the more familiar you become with that voice is, the more familiar you become with yourself, and the more luck or the more chance you'll have in altering that voice to really reflect what it is you want. So in other words, some of us were born in situations where we were told that we couldn't succeed, that we wouldn't succeed, that we didn't have what it took to succeed. And if those are the voices that are going off in our mind, how hard is success going to be if we don't come to terms with those voices and do something to change them? It's going to be next to impossible, because that voice plays a much stronger role in the way that we move forward with our decisions and the things that we do than than maybe our desire. When that voice matches our desire, then our desire starts to light up. But if our desire is different than that voice, then we've got to learn how to get that voice into line with what we desire. So this is the same in the workbook, these same exercises, fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. I put the exact thing, the exact experience, the exact person you want to be, whatever it is that you desire. But it's not sufficient merely to say, I want plenty of money. Be definite as to the amount. So in other words, if this is you're wanting to be something, then you need to describe the environment and be specific about what it is that you want to be. So if let's say you want to be a pediatrician, it's not enough to say, hey, I want to be a pediatrician. You have to say, I want to work with children who have health issues so that I can educate them and show them specifically what it is. And then I might actually take an example. I might start to think about Bobby or Susie as a little child and what their health issue is and my interaction with them, and see it is as in real time. Your subconscious mind does not recognize past or future. It only knows now. So if you tell your subconscious mind, sometime in the future I'll get this, it will always put that off into the future. But this is one of the reasons why when you rereading these things, they talk about seeing it with yourself right now. Seeing it when you talk about, I think it's the plan here, Write Out a Clear, can say something that you tend to acquire. Where it is, in here somewhere, and I'm sure you guys can find it, is the basically talking about it as if you're already in possession of it. So when I read my desire statement, my desirement statement has me looking at my bank statement in the now, as if I'm looking at it right now, and I'm looking at the number on the bank statement. And I at one point I look out the window and I describe what's outside my window of my home. And I describe the type of vacation I'm taking. I describe the type of travel I do. I'm very descriptive because I'm helping my subconscious mind create what needs to be created in that process. And we'll get more into why this is in as we get closer, particularly in autosuggestion. So that we're looking for. But this is the line I was looking earlier for. Every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. I cannot tell you how valuable that is. Now, I'm not trying to tell you to go out and force failure upon yourself, but don't be afraid of it. Every time I have failed and was able to recognize it and learn from it, I got an immense return from it. So, Edison, what was it, 10,000 times that he tried different things with the filament and, before he came across tungsten for the light bulb. So you just don't quit. You just keep on moving. So that's really what it's all about. This is the Marconi piece. Marconi's friends had him taken into custody and examined in a psychopathic hospital, and he announced he had discovered a principle through which he could send messages through air without the aid of wires. So, thank goodness we don't have friends that block us up when we have some crazy ideas. So it is important. Dreams are the seedlings of reality. It is what's making things happen. But the fact of the matter is that, that's just the start. A burning desire to be and to do is the starting point from which the dreamer must take off. Dreams are not born of indifference, laziness, or lack of ambition. You've been disappointed, you've undergone defeat, you felt the great heart within you crushed until it bled. Take courage, for these experiences have tempered the spiritual metal of which you are made. They are assets of incomparable value. That all who succeed in life get off to a bad start and pass through many heartbreaking struggles before they arrive. The turning point usually comes at the moment of some crisis through which they're introduced to the other selves. So again, don't be afraid to go out there and take chances, to move yourself towards your desire, to move yourself towards what you're wanting. Here's the beautiful thing about starting to identify this for yourself and starting to identify your goals. When I have a clear idea of what my goals are, all other decisions become easy, because all I have to ask myself is, do they help me get closer to my goal or not? And if it doesn't help me get closer to my goal, I don't do it. If it does, I do it. So if I have problems making, typically the people who I know have met who have a hard time making a decision, they don't have clear goals for themselves. Because if they had clear goals for themselves, there's no more decision to make. It's been made. So again, through this chapter and through what we go through, even if, we're going to talk about this a little more in subsequent chapters, but the idea, even if it's the simplest of goals, it doesn't have to be altruistic or great. It doesn't have to be something you love. It can be just something you like. And learning to achieve what you like will also teach you how to achieve what you love, teach you how to find what you love as well. So, long story short, we'll wrap it up here. But the fact of the matter is that you really have to believe that you can make it happen. You have to have this desire. I mean, I just happened to run across this chapter, this paragraph here, which is a great one. There's a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. Open-mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity, than is required to accept misery and poverty. So, seeing yourself with it in the present day, in present time, seeing what it is you're desiring in your mind's eye as if you already have it, is what cultivates the belief that you can have it. So if you don't believe that you can have it, if for some reason you got some programming that said you'll never be a millionaire, and that voice, again, listen to these voices in our head, that voice plays out for you, you will never have that $1 million because you won't believe it. You have to believe that what you're desiring, what you're going over, you can actually acquire. And there's typically no reason why you can't. So, this story actually, I don't know if any of you were like touched by this story, especially if you have children, of him and his son. But I know for me, it's personally brought like tears because some of you may know this, but when my son was 3 years old, he was diagnosed with diabetes. And it was a really very shocking moment for us in our lives. He had been sick for 2 or 3 days. It was like a flu he wasn't getting over. He was becoming dehydrated. He was becoming, lethargic. So we took him to the emergency room. They took his blood sugar and said, yeah, he's diabetic. And this was like something completely new to me. And I didn't know anything about it. And the first thing that anyone told me about it was that it was incurable. That diabetes, type 1 diabetes, was incurable. It was like one of the very first things the doctors, and I had a friend look it up for me and all that while I was in the hospital, and it's incurable. And I remember to this day, I doubt my son does, I remember leaning down to him and whispering in his ear, son, we have this so that we can believe a cure into existence. I truly believe that. I refuse to believe. There was another time that he was admitted into the hospital, and I'm not your typical patient. I'm an educated and informed patient, and so as I was trying, or in this case my son, I was educated and informed about what was going on, and I was trying to get things through to the doctor that they weren't quite understanding. Without going into great detail about it, they were being contradictory to what was. Finally, I was able to get them to see what I was saying, but through this whole process, they had me take a test on whether or not I knew anything about diabetes, right? And so I took their test, and the very last question was, diabetes is curable. And I knew it, true or false. And I knew they wanted me to answer false there. And I left it blank. I refused to answer it because I refuse to believe that it's incurable. Now, the doctor who actually talked to me when I had completed the test didn't even actually ever look at the test, because once we spoke, she was like, oh, you know what you're doing. I don't need to read this. But the fact of the matter is that I believe that it is curable. And it has shown, actually coincidentally, about that same time, this woman, this was maybe in 2006, he'd had it for 3 years or so, this woman up in MIT in Boston, or excuse me, not MIT, Mayo Clinic in Boston. She had cured and discovered, discovered the cure for type 1 diabetes in white mice. And when she had done it, there were people that were very strong in the diabetic world, such as the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, that went, no, that's impossible. It can't happen that way. Hear the words, no, that's impossible. It can't happen that way. And so her research was called into question. And so fortunately, Lee Iacocca, who was a very influential businessman here in the United States in the late 20th century, his first wife, I say fortunately, his first wife died of complications of diabetes, type 1. So he created a foundation that he could put money into to help try to find the cure for it. So that's the fortunate part. And that foundation went and hired 2 other independent labs to recreate her research. And they came back a year later and said, yeah, we've done it too. They're currently in the last stages, last human trials of this cure for diabetes. So literally in the next, say, 18 months, you're going to hear in the news they've cured diabetes. So when I read this story about his son, I get teary because it's really my story. I mean, it's the same. And it was because of this story that I had the determination to tell my son, we're going to believe a cure into existence. I knew I didn't have the medical expertise. I knew I didn't have the technology. I knew I didn't have any of the information necessary to be able to be responsible for bringing a cure in. But that didn't mean that I couldn't believe that a cure was real and that it could happen. And so I refused to believe or to try to predetermine how the package was going to come. But I knew the package was coming. And so we're close to that. And so my son, my dream is that by the time he's an adult, which is 3 years away, he no longer has to worry about giving himself insulin every day because this cure has become into place. So again, this particular story for me is a very touching story. As I read it again this past week to prepare for the class, I cried because it was just, to me, being a parent and understanding the desire you have for your children to be able to be as normal as they can be. There's no pure love. And so that love behind the story that he tells is what drove it to be possible. And so I absolutely understand it and think it's awesome. So again, if you haven't read these chapters, I highly suggest you do. They're, not only are they full of information, but they have some great stories and some great things to to really think about and contemplate and understand. And if you look, you'll find that lots of people have these stories. These weren't just exclusive to the people he talks about himself. We can go out and find stories like this all day long of people who refused to quit or refused to stop, and they kept making it happen. So, long story short, all achievement, no matter what be its nature or purpose, must begin with an intense, burning desire for something definite. And nature wraps up in the impulse of a strong desire. That something recognizes no such word as impossible and accepts no such reality as failure. So when I tell you my own story about with my son and all that, I refuse. I mean, I have all these doctors, all these experts telling me that it's one way. And, in my mind's eye, I had the finger out to all of them. And excuse my language, but I was going, screw you. I refuse to believe what you're telling me. Just because it might be what is known up to this extent.